Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Lovecraft Country. A great episode, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, after the aftermath of last episode, everyone's come together because the fact is, obviously, Dee's in the situation that she's in, and it's like, it's kind of the back and forth, but Ruby's like, it's literally all your fault. I mean, to be fair, everyone else was so preoccupied with so much stuff last episode that Dee kind of sadly became like a second priority. But now it's a thing of like, well, what do we do? And it's like, all right, we have the pages, so we can use them to leverage Christina into helping us. But sadly, Letty already gave her the pages last episode for invulnerability, and so it's like, obviously, Tick is immediately understanding, but the fact of the matter is Montrose is pissed because he's like, you did this, you screwed us over by you doing that. You said you were done with magic. You said, Matt, basically you were saying that magic was worse, bad, and all this, and what do? You go running to her, and you take advantage of magic. But it's like, Ruby's like, you don't understand. She had to do it for not only just herself, but then like Letty stops her and be like, stop, Ruby. So it's like, well, what else do they have to potentially leverage? And obviously, for Ruby, it's like Christina would do it if I ask her to, because now it's out in the open. It's like, oh, now they know that Ruby knows, and Ruby knows everything, so it's a thing of like, I don't know if Ruby ever went to the ins and outs and explaining why Christina would be so willing to do things for her, but when it's all said and done, it's like, all right, Christina's willing to help, but the fact of the matter is, to reverse this magic, they'd have to go to Lancaster. Lancaster's the only one who'd be able to reverse it because he's the one who cast it. But with him being dead, it's like, that won't be applicable in this situation. So basically, at first, they're kind of like, all right, it needs to be someone that's kind of like a close enough blood relative. And I guess in the grand scheme of things, it was supposed to be like Montrose, because it's like they couldn't use Tick's blood. I forgot what the reasoning behind that was. Because basically it wasn't going to be as simple as, just using his blood or whatever. So it needed to be like, at first it's kind of like it has to be Montrose, which Montrose is struggling with that because it's like, eventually he admits to Tick, it's like, I might not be your dad. George might have been your dad. And now it's like, and obviously this is hitting Tick even more because for him it's like, once again, he already had to deal with the fact that his dad's gay, and in the sense that like, you beat me because I, trying to make me into a man, and your situation is what it is. So it's like Tick now realizes like, you were beating me because you weren't dealing with your own shit, and then you took it out on me because you weren't dealing with the fact that you were gay, and you took it out on me. Now on top of that, it's like, wait, Uncle George? Because at first he's like, whoa, Mama cheated on you, Uncle George, but he's like, after what we went through, you create a bond, you grow close, and it's like, during the whole Tulsa massacre situation, and it's like, for a Tick, it sets him off even more, because it's like, in his mind, it's like, my Mama nor George were there to protect me, but at least, it's like, but now you're telling me I'm his son, I'm potentially his son, and he wasn't there to protect, because he's like, I used to sit over there in that very chair you're sitting in right now, contemplate, like, trying to hide away from you so you don't beat me, and, wishing that Uncle George was my actual dad, and it turns out he actually was, and because he already blamed George so much, because, he came up in the first episode, how he blamed George for not protecting him from Montrose. Now it's like, oh, you had double reason to protect me. Not only, was I family, I'm literally potentially your son, and you didn't do anything to protect me. And sadly, it seems like that's almost like this cycle that is in his family to a certain extent. And I think maybe there's some part of Tick that's worried, like, because I think, because obviously because of his upbringing, that's why he wants to be there even more so for his son, because it's like the complicated upbringing he had. And obviously when you look at his dad and George's upbringing, it wasn't the best either, But, when this is all going down, lo and behold, who shows up? Hippolyta. And it's like, oh shit, I guess, with all that dimension hopping and stuff like that, it takes a while to finally get back. Because remember, she was like gone for like a week. What was interesting though, in many different fronts, on one side one thing was, we noticed that, God, I'm blanking. Oh, right, Dee was turning into one of those creatures. So I'm like, oh, I guess they were kind of those girls that were after her, I guess they were cursed as well, so they were probably regular. I mean, because obviously, like, they looked like they were characters from the book brought to life. I guess the curse manifested them like that. Whatever the case may be, it was just kind of interesting seeing that Dee was slowly turning into him. And I brought it up last episode. It reminds me of the boogie people from Don't Look Under the Bed. That, like, what was it, a 90s Disney movie? Regardless, Hippolyta does show up in time, and this helps out the situation. But obviously, there's a whole conversation about, like, obviously, like, Christina's willing to help, but she wants, Atticus to come to Artem with her, and that's the price, and obviously he's willing to pay it. And at the end of it all, Ruby's leaving with Christina, and Letty's like, you can't trust her. She's like, the fact of the matter is, it's like, look at this family situation, like, get out away from, like, Tick and his family before, but she's like, Christina, like, I got shot. It's like, yeah, but Christina wasn't the one that did it. Her dad is, and she brought you back. But it's like, it's like that spell, that thing she's trying to do, she's going to end up killing Tick in the process, because Letty now knows, because of Gia, that Tick will die. She doesn't know the circumstances, but she knows he will die. And this potentially seems like the situation that could lead to him dying. And it hits Ruby at a point that even later on she's asking about, Dell. She's like, it's like, oh, who's this lady? It's like, Dell, what happened to her? Your sister hit her on her head with a shovel. It's like, there's a lot more to that. But now it's a situation of, like, the talk between them, because she's like, you were just trying to use me. She's like, no. It's like, admit it. Like, I was your plan B. And it's like, yes, I saw the opportunity to get what I want. And yes, to become immortal, I'm going to need every drop of Tick's blood. But for her, and it's that interesting thing where she's like, I want to become immortal. Because basically when she was growing, like, basically her family, I keep saying the word. I know that's a bad habit of mine. I was saying the word basically. Her family would use magic as a currency. That it was kind of talked about, like, oh, like money and wealth, and they use magic as a means of gaining power. And for her, it's like she wants to be able to see the world, and it's like there's so much out there that you can't experience in one lifetime. And if you have immortality, you can live it up. But it's like eventually, like, as we all know, there is a downside to immortality that maybe she's just not willing to see yet. But she has this almost altruistic way of looking at it, but at the same time, it's not altruistic, but like it's a beautiful sentiment. But it's like the prices you're willing to pay to get to that immortality is where things kind of go, ugh, But Ruby's still just kind of along with the ride, because she feels something like Christina understands her in a way like she feels like probably no one else can. So she's like, all right, I'll stick with you. Just promise me you won't hurt my sister, which I don't think Ruby recognizes. Like, your sister loves Atticus. Him dying will hurt her. So it's like, Christina's promising something she won't be able to keep. She meant it more in a physical sense, but, your sister's emotional well-being matters a lot too. But even her being like, we see her kind of, I guess she's killing Dale, taking her off life support or whatever, and it's like, oh, when I imagine myself as a white woman, I always imagine myself as a redhead. So it's just like kind of showing you like how easily, like, out of anyone, it seems like Ruby's been seduced by that magic, because it allows her to be what she wants, to get what she wants. I think as someone who's always just never having the upbringing, having the hustler of a mom she had, I think for her it's like now I maybe in her own way, this is her way of hustling the world back, because having a mom the way she did, and always trying to do the right thing, and it just it's like, no, I'm gonna do what I want now. I'm gonna put my needs before anyone else's, because she always kind of as a sister, I think she always had to feel like she had to do that for Letty, to a certain extent, like put Letty's, it's like she always tried to do right by Letty. I think she felt an obligation as her sister. So there's all of that. We have Christina as William popping up and seeing Lancaster. I kept wondering whether his situation was what I thought it was. I wasn't sure. I was like, when you saw his body, I wasn't sure of it. It turns out it is. He's basically transplanting body parts of black people. They find black people, they slice and dice them, they butcher them, and then use them as spare body parts for him. But no matter how much they try to repair the damage exists, so it ends up killing him. And it's like, after what happened to William, Christina, it's like, she's like, every time I shed this spell, it feels like William dies over and over again. So he's died 1,000 times for me. I want you to experience 1,000 deaths, but I'll be fine with just the one. And I think for her, it's like that smile across her face, her being able to watch him die in William's skin. I think there is a poetic justice to it in a sense. So. And at the end of the day, you're kind of like, yeah, fuck Lancaster, what he did to Dave. He's just a shitty, racist piece of shit human being anyway, so you're like, you don't feel that bad for him. You're just kind of like, oh, you got what you deserved, especially when you find out, like, oh, you've been killing black people just to steal their... Like, I was wondering if that's what that whole Frankenstein thing... Because we'd seen the stitches and just his body, I thought it was like, was his body burnt or something? I didn't even get it. But now in retrospect, it just adds even more, like, double middle fingers to him for being the shitty person he is. But obviously with everything with Hippolyta, it's like, all right, we can save D. We need the book of names, right? Well, we can use the device. It's like, the device is broken. I can fix it. We're basically going to do because the device isn't necessarily a time traveling device necessarily. It's more like a dimension hopping device. And so what ended up being this interesting thing, though, is as they get there, she's fixing it. Obviously, Montrose is thinking about the past and everything because of the way he raised his son. And I think because when they go to the past, he ends up seeing firsthand, like, oh, we see history literally repeats itself because it's like pick a switch. What he did to Atticus was done to him, So history does repeat itself. That trauma repeated itself. So obviously Montrose, ever since going through that portal, because basically there's like trillions of like different dimensions out there. Because Hippolyta had talked about it, like she was like 5'4". I forgot what she was saying. She was like, I was on that Earth. I was like there for like 200 years. So like so it makes you wonder like how much of what happened to her carried over. I mean, it looks like, what we see is when she's activating the device that some of it carried over because she still has like things in her arm. Before that, I needed to circle back and talk about the conversation between Letty and Montrose because she's like, okay, I have a reason for doing it. It's like, you're pregnant. She's like, how'd you know? Did, Ruby tell you? It's like, no, Tick did. Hippolyta wasn't the only one that went to the future. So did Tick. And it's like, he met your son. And for Montrose, it's like, I get it. You had your reasons for doing what you did, but you doing what you did, giving Christina those pages, you screwed over my son. Because it's like, because Atticus went to the future, he knows he dies because of Christina's spell. And it's like, for him, it's like, I get you did what you needed to do, but you basically had a hand in giving Christina what she needed to kill my son. So it's like, you get to have yours, but while taking mine away. And then, Letty's like, wait, so I'm having a son, And so it's that thing of like, you can't blame Letty because she was trying to do, what was best for the family. And it's just like inadvertently, she didn't know, because it's like, why didn't Tick say anything? It's because it's like, once again, it's that thing of like him shouldering a lot because, he knows the future. He knows, their story, how it ends for him, And, I think for him, maybe it kind of feels in, a little bit like this episode where it's like the thing of like, you don't want to change the past. Like, this is his present, but he doesn't want to change it because if he changes it, who knows what the future has in store, how the future might be shaped out. That becomes the thing of like, is things, because it seems like time is malleable enough where it's like you can change stuff and do stuff, but at other times you're like, maybe things are a lot more set in stone than you think they are. We'll get to that soon enough, but you understand where Montrose is coming from, because I think because it's like, regardless of his guilt and everything, that's still his son. But you also understand where Letty's coming from, so it's not just a simple solution of like her being at fault. It's a complicated situation. But they go to like because I think I misunderstood. I guess because of the dimension hopping, it allows it to kind of be a form of time travel. Because like I think Hippolyta was saying like we have to find like basically we're going through so many dimensions, so she has to narrow it down, I guess, to this particular dimension and like the past. Because I thought her whole point was finding a 1921 Tulsa that was super close to this world's 1921 Tulsa, but it's like, no, it's the same dimension. She just had to lock into this particular one to kind of act as time travel. But So obviously, once again, when Montrose is there, it's hitting him because it's like, being there's just a reminder of everything. Like, he knows what's in store because all the massacre happens that night. So he already knows what's up. So they go there to, and obviously, like, Montrose and Atticus have their, like, that breakdown between them because, like, not breakdown isn't the right word, but, Atticus snaps at Montrose because, once again, he accepted so much because it's like, once again, you might beat me, but at least I thought because you were my dad, it was some form of love. And it's like, you aren't even my dad. So it's like, I went through all that for nothing. Uncle George and everyone else stood on the sideline, and I wasn't even your kid. And they potentially knew that. And that's what happened, so for him, it's like, when this is done, when we've saved D, we're done, and it's, And then obviously he sees firsthand, Atticus and Letty both see firsthand what George and Montrose's dad was like. And I kept looking at the actor at first. I was like, why do I recognize him? It took me a little while, but then I was like, oh my God, it's the actor who plays Lala on Black Lightning, which I think, DC connection, because once again, Journey, who plays Letty, played Black Canary, so it's just interesting the like DC connections up in this bitch, obviously this also being like on HBO, which is on the Warner Brothers, so I just think that's so interesting. Regardless, but the fact of the matter is him beating Montrose like that, and luckily it was Tick's mom that stood up to, and it's like her dad, it's like, you want to do whatever, you want to raise your sons however you want to, fine, but don't you dare lay a hand on my kid, and obviously, like, she chastised George a little bit for, like, not defending Montrose. And it's like, you should be doing something for him. But Montrose is like, she had no idea, but he did more for me than anyone else could, and did. Because his dad is like, oh, at least I know there's one other man in the house, putting Montrose down even more by, saying that George is the man. It's just... And obviously, it's like, Letty being like, no one deserved it. And you can see the look on Atticus's faces, because I'm sure when he sees that, it makes him feel sympathetic for his dad. Like, seeing it firsthand, it's one thing. But also, I'm sure it's also like looking in a mirror to a certain extent, because it's like, that's what happened to you. Or maybe you can make the argument. I mean, I'm sure it's not apples to oranges, not trying to compare it to apples. It is probably like an apples to oranges situation. But part of me wonders, is Atticus like, oh shit, dad got it even worse tonight? Maybe, maybe not. He might be exactly, might be exactly the same. But Montrose leaves because, it's like, crap, they think he's going to try and save George and warn him about Artem. So Tick goes, but before he goes, Letty's like, maybe we should name him George. And obviously she doesn't know yet, but obviously, like, the way Tick gives her the look, she probably now knows, like, that is his name in the future, isn't it? So it's like, now she knows that he knows that, what he experienced because Montrose told her. But it's like, once again, that's what I was talking about, like, things being set in stone. It's like, you decided you wanted to give him the name George, and it's like, oh, that's exactly what his name is in the future, so there's that. Letty stays behind. She's trying to stay behind and, get the book, but, like, these white people just start showing up, obviously, shooting at her. Luckily, George and Montrose's dad is shooting back. Goes to the house next door, but this is the house that's obviously both houses end up burning down, but it's she's locked in there and she knows literally everyone that's in there dies, so she's like, that's a hard pill to swallow, especially when that was a young Hippolyto, wasn't it? The one that Letty was talking to. I think it was basically like, everything's going to be okay, right? And she has to lie, because that's the complicated thing about time travel. It's like, you want to change so much, but you can't, because if you do, you have no idea what the ramifications will be. You don't know what the ripple effect would be. Same thing on Montrose's part, because, luckily Atticus shows up and he's like, you can't warn. He's like, I'm not here to warn George. He's there to save someone else, Thomas. Because the fact of the matter is, for him, he called Thomas the F word because it's like, this was my friend. Like, because part of me was wondering whether Thomas was like his first love or something. But it was for him, maybe. I wasn't really sure how he, like, because he was saying it was being described as friend, but I'm like, was that your first love, or was it just because he was someone else that was like you, who was gay, and you said the F word to him, you called him that because he wanted, and it was actually kind of sad when you hear Montrose really break it down, like because Atticus is like, you can't change anything, you can't save him, because if you save him, it might change things so that it leads to you never getting with my mom, that maybe I'm never born, and then my son is never potentially born. So, but obviously it's like, are you willing to risk all that? But for him, it's like, everything he did was because he wanted to be, he cut away the softer side of himself because it was all about pride. He wanted to pride himself. It's like, I'm a man because, what his dad put him through. He cut away, for years, hid that side away from himself, didn't accept that side of himself. He's like, even to the point, it wasn't till now that I remember Thomas's name, because I buried it so deep because of just everything associated with him being gay. I think he buried it so deep because he didn't want to acknowledge it. He hid that part of himself away. And he wanted to save Thomas because he was thinking, like, it's such a little thing. Like, he didn't deserve to kind of die the way he did, especially like the last moments between them being him. Well, for one, the words between them being him calling him the F word, but even like those white people showing up, and the last, just on instinct, they held each other's hand, which he was like, we never did that before because we were too afraid. So that's why because Atticus had realized like how important Thomas was to him. So like, who knows, if Thomas was around, maybe things would, that night in itself, that everything in combination, I think, is what drove Montrose to, bury that side of himself. And they end up, Thomas dying like that, and his blood splattering, brains and blood splattering on Montrose like that, of course, is going to hit you hard, And luckily, George and Atticus' mom had showed up to defend him, because it's like, luckily they only had one gun, so they were fighting him off, but it's like, well, he's like, then some stranger with the bat saved us. It was like, came out like Jackie Robinson saying, I got you, kid. And they looked at each other, which I'm like, oh, that's interesting how that comes full circle, because Atticus had a dream about Jackie Robin literally taking the bat, splitting Cthulhu in half, So it's interesting for it to come back like that. And, it's like, maybe, that dream had a lot more significance than maybe Atticus realized at the time. But then he walks forward, and because it's like, oh man, maybe we changed something because no one's here. And then the bat's in front of him, and Montrose is like, holy, it's that time travel thing of everything coming full circle. It's like, lo and behold, who were you saved by? Your son, But luckily, Atticus picks up the bat, beats the living shit out of everybody, and then walks over to all of them, in particular to Montrose, and says, I got you, kid, and walks away. So while that's all happening, the portal is freaking out because obviously it's taking a strain on Hippolyta to keep the portal open, but she needs to keep the portal open because they need to get the book. At the same time, Letty, is talking to that older lady in the house, and that situation, convincing them of like, okay, I know what's up. From the future, I need this book of names, and it's like, I have your great grandson right here, and it's like, for her, it's a thing of like, what happens to us, and the house starts getting set on fire. She's like, I have to do something, but she's like, you can't, because I love Atticus, and everything that goes down now leads to him being born, and I don't want him to not exist, because it also means my baby I need him to exist, I don't know if that's ever come up between them, whether they've actually said that to each other, that they love each other. I don't think they have, Atticus has hinted to it when he told Gia last time, like, oh, she, what we had wasn't real, kind of implying what him and Lady have is real, But I don't know if they've actually expressed that to each other, that they do love each other, I don't know if they've said it in words, but that moment of her, like, being there with her as she's like, it's like, let's pray together, and they're burning, because she's like, that great son of mine will be my faith brought to flesh, kind of being that hope, because it's like everything is terrible, but it's like, let that child grow up and kind of be my hope brought to life, and then like Letty holding her hand as the place is burning, as she's burning, and it's like Letty's not affected because she's invulnerable, and her walking down the street, all the destruction, bombs exploding near her, but she's unaffected because of the spell. Luckily, her and Montrose go through, and Hippolyta was pushing and straining herself so much that, like, her hair started turning blue, so she's becoming more like the character that Dee had drawn. So it's like, luckily they got the book, and it's like, we fucking got it. So now they can save Dee. But it's interesting because I think this did a lot to also repair Montrose and Atticus's relationship, but it also put a lot of things in perspective, I think, for both, Atticus when it comes to his dad, but also his situation with Letty, and obviously I think maybe put things in a certain perspective for Letty too, because Montrose had said it's like, you think you know war, but you don't, and I think for Letty, seeing that all firsthand, what that means in the grand scheme of things, what that means for her, having seen that, having experienced that, having to let people die, having to let someone die in front of you because you can't take the chance of it changing anything, So it's going to be interesting to see where everything takes us going forward. Obviously, the next episode is the season finale, so I'm curious to see how they end up wrapping up this season. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.